The crack of porcelain was sharper than a scream in the silent dining room. Shards of the dinner plates skittered across Mom's good floor, the one no one was ever supposed to scuff. Mom didn't even flinch. She stood there, her hand still raised, clutching the broken edge of the plate like it was a weapon she had been waiting her whole life to finally use. "Maybe," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm, venom dripping from every single word, "you'll finally learn to keep that useless mouth of yours shut." Across the table, Dad leaned back in his plush chair, swirling the amber whiskey in his glass. He watched me with a lazy disinterest as if I were nothing more than a stubborn stain on the perfect fabric of his evening. "You've always been dead weight," he muttered into his drink, shaking his head with a sigh of profound disappointment. "We carried you long enough. You should be grateful we even let you sit at this table." I pressed a linen napkin against my cheek, feeling the warm, sticky trickle of blood, but my sister Harper snatched it away with a perfectly manicured hand and a sickeningly sweet smirk. "Don't ruin the linen, Jamie," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Mom actually likes those." My brother, Mason, burst out laughing from beside her, a loud, ugly sound that echoed in the tense silence. "Worthless," he spat, the word hitting me harder than the plate. "Absolutely worthless. They should have just left you at the hospital." Their voices were sharp blades, but what cut deeper, what truly hollowed me out, was the silence from everyone else. The room was full. Aunts, uncles, neighbors, all of them sat there, frozen at the dinner table. They pretended nothing was wrong. They sipped their expensive wine, they laughed at some distant joke, their eyes carefully avoiding the sight of me standing there, bleeding and broken in the middle of the room. I wasn't a person to them. I was a minor inconvenience, a brief interruption to their pleasant evening. Something inside me cracked that night. But it wasn't just the bone in my cheek. It was the last fragile thread of hope I had been foolishly holding on to for years. I had lived inside a fantasy, a desperate dream that if I just worked hard enough, if I loved them enough, if I made myself smaller and smaller, one day I would finally matter to them. In that moment, watching them all turn away, that fantasy dissolved into ash. The tears stopped before they could even form. The aching need for their approval vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. For the first time, I saw them for what they truly were: parasites, feeding on their own golden image, desperate to appear flawless to the world while they were rotting from the inside out. I made a decision then and there. I wouldn't just leave. I wouldn't just survive their cruelty. I would burn down the hollow pedestal they had built for themselves. I would make them feel the same humiliation they forced on me, but 1,000 times worse. For the next 2 months, I became the perfect victim. I played the part they had written for me with flawless precision. I lowered my voice to a whisper. I avoided their eyes when they spoke to me. I nodded silently whenever they called me a burden, a failure, a waste of space. To them, I became invisible, a ghost in their grand house. I was broken and beaten, completely incapable of standing up for myself. It was exactly what I wanted them to believe. But while they saw a shadow, I was building an arsenal in the dark. I started small, collecting the little pieces of their hypocrisy they left scattered around like breadcrumbs. I found Harper's unedited photos, the ones that showed the reality behind her perfect influencer lifestyle. I discovered her bank statements, which told a very different story from the one she sold to her followers. I saved the drunken voice notes she sent to Mason, the ones where she viciously trash-talked the very same sponsors she begged for free products, calling their fans pathetic idiots. Mason, in his arrogance, made my job even easier. He bragged constantly about skimming cash from Dad's big construction deals, laughing about how stupid and trusting the clients were. He was sloppy, leaving a trail of evidence everywhere. He went fake invoices, secret bank accounts, coded text messages about his schemes. I collected and saved every last one. Then there was Dad. He believed he was completely untouchable, a king in his own kingdom. For years, he had been hiding undeclared income and making under-the-table deals, confident no one would ever find out. I knew there had to be a paper trail somewhere. After weeks of secretly digging through old, hard drives in his office late at night, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards, I found it. It was all buried in old, archived emails he thought were long gone. A detailed map of his financial crimes. Mom was different. Her power wasn't in money. It was in emotional manipulation. She had spun a complex web of texts and emails, a digital record of her cruelty. I found messages where she bullied distant relatives into giving her money, where she mocked their weight, their marriages, their children, all while painting herself as the family's long-suffering martyr. I collected those too, knowing exactly how toxic and ugly they would look when exposed to the harsh light of day. But just gathering their dirt wasn't enough. Not for the kind of destruction I had in mind. I didn't want them to be exposed quietly. In some news article, I wanted them to destroy themselves, publicly and spectacularly. That's when I remembered Ethan Reyes, 3 years ago. My father had publicly ruined Ethan's life at a huge charity gala in front of the entire company. Dad fired him, accusing him of theft, to cover up his own fraud. I was there that night. I remembered the look of sheer humiliation on Ethan's face as security guards escorted him out of the room like a criminal. I spent days tracking him down, unsure if he would even speak to the daughter of the man who had destroyed him. But when I finally found him and told him who I was and what I was planning, something dangerous and familiar lit up in his eyes. "I've been waiting for this," he said, his voice a low growl. He handed me a flash drive. It contained all the evidence Ethan had kept for 3 long years. There were emails proving Dad had set him up, fake audits Dad had created, and records of the secret off-book accounts that Ethan had been blamed for. It was dynamite, and I had just found the perfect stage to light the fuse. 2 weeks later, Harper excitedly announced the annual City Renewal Gala on all her social media channels. It was an exclusive event hosted by Dad's company, packed with sponsors, politicians, influencers, and the kind of wealthy, image-obsessed people my family adored. It was meant to be their biggest night of the year, the night that would seal their status as the city's perfect golden family. I smiled when I saw the date. I wasn't just going to ruin their image. I was going to make them confess their sins. Live, in front of everyone who ever worshipped them. By the time I was done, the very people who laughed while I bled would be crawling through the dust they once made me eat. The City Renewal Gala glittered like a fantasy. Crystal chandeliers threw warm golden light across a vast ballroom filled with polite laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft, constant murmur of powerful people making deals. Everywhere I looked, men in sleek tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns smiled for cameras, raising their glasses to toast my father's visionary leadership. I stood near the grand entrance, hidden in plain sight. I was wearing the simple black gown Harper had once mocked me for buying, calling it too cheap to be worn anywhere important. I'd had it altered, reshaped. Tonight, I didn't look like the quiet, broken shadow they thought they'd beaten into submission. Tonight, I looked untouchable. I watched them on the main stage, a perfect portrait of success. Mom was glowing with her practiced fake elegance. Dad was soaking up the adoration, like it was oxygen. Harper was preening for the livestream cameras, and Mason was throwing his arm around wealthy sponsors, as if they were his oldest and dearest friends. They were perfect, exactly the way I needed them to be. The event hit its peak when Dad walked to the microphone to give his signature speech about family, resilience, hard work, and values. The crowd applauded like mindless sheep, and a bitter laugh twisted in my stomach. That's when I triggered the first step. The giant LED screens behind him flickered. For a split second, a wave of confusion swept the room. Then, Harper's carefully curated Instagram photos appeared, displayed side by side, with screenshots of the vicious emails where she mocked every brand she had ever partnered with. "Cheap trash," one caption read, next to a photo of her smiling with their product. "Only idiots buy this stuff." Gasps echoed across the hall. Harper froze, mid-pose, her eyes wide with horror as her carefully crafted digital empire began to crumble in real time. The cameras kept rolling. Next, Mason's fraudulent invoices flashed onto the screens. Fake numbers, illegal payments, and then a candid photo of Mason at a bar, laughing and bragging about how he'd skimmed enough money off Dad's deals to buy a new jet ski without anyone noticing. I saw Dad's face twitch, his hand gripping the podium so tightly his knuckles turned. White. Mason spun towards him, his face pale. "You knew about this," Mason hissed, just loud enough for the front row to hear. "Don't you dare look at me like I'm the one to blame," Dad snapped back, his voice as sharp as broken glass. "Oh, please," Harper barked, her sweet facade finally cracking. "You taught us how to cheat, Dad. Don't act so innocent now." The microphones were still live. Everyone heard every word. The sponsors began whispering amongst themselves, their smiles vanishing. Phones were buzzing all over the room, notifications lighting up faces in the crowd. I knew what they were seeing. Ethan and I had timed it perfectly. The information packet we'd sent to a list of journalists contained every last email proving Dad's tax fraud, every shady deal he had buried under shell companies. It was already trending on Twitter under the hashtag #GoldenFamilyExposed. I watched Dad's phone vibrate nonstop on the podium, his expression shifting from confusion to panic to pure rage. "This is you," he snarled at Harper, jabbing a finger in her face. "You did this. You ruined us." "Oh, screw you, Dad," Harper spat back, her voice shaking. "This is your mess, not mine." Sponsors started walking out. Camera crews rushed forward, capturing every second of the implosion. Guests were whispering loud enough for my parents to hear. Fraud, liars, they thought they were untouchable. Mom's perfect composure finally shattered. "Stop fighting," she hissed, grabbing Dad's arm. "We can fix this if we just stay united." But it was too late. Mason shoved Harper. Harper shoved him back. And suddenly, the four of them were tearing into each other under the blinding stage lights, screaming accusations and dragging every one of their hidden betrayals out into the open while hundreds of people watched, just as I had planned. And then came the final blow. The grand doors at the back of the hall swung open and Ethan Reyes walked in. A new wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. People remembered him. They remembered what my father had done. Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His calm, quiet presence was enough to make Dad stumble over his own words. Sweating and shaking under the spotlight, the humiliation was absolute. The once invincible family was crumbling live on camera, their downfall broadcast to thousands watching from home. By the time the livestream was cut, their legacy was nothing but dust. But I wasn't finished. I stood in the hallway outside the gala, the muffled shouting of my family bleeding through the double doors. The storm was just beginning. My palms were damp, but my resolve was solid steel. Tonight wasn't just about humiliation. It was about taking away every single thing they had built on my pain. Ethan stepped beside me, his jaw tight. Years ago, my father had destroyed him. Now, he was my silent partner, the ghost, my family thought. They had buried. "You ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded once. "It's time." By the next morning, the world had devoured the chaos from the gala. Every one of Harper's brand sponsors had terminated their deals. Mason's fraudulent invoices went viral, obliterating his image as a business genius overnight. Dad's name trended under #GoldenFraud as investigative journalists ripped apart every contract he'd ever signed. But my revenge wasn't just about exposing them. It was about stripping them of their power. Ethan and I had spent months preparing. Through his network of contacts, he had quietly acquired a controlling interest in my family's biggest source of pride, Reynolds Development Group. By noon, the takeover was finalized. By evening, their access cards to the building no longer worked. I watched from a cafe across the street as Dad stormed up to the gleaming glass doors, yanking on the handle like a desperate drowning man. Security stopped him cold. "This is my company," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty plaza. "Not anymore, Mr. Reynolds," the guard replied calmly. "Ownership was transferred this morning. You'll need to schedule an appointment." The look on his face was a masterpiece of defeated rage. I would never forget it. Harper tried to salvage her career by posting a tearful video blaming me for everything. It was a fatal mistake. Ethan had already leaked unreleased clips of Harper mocking her own fans, laughing at the very people who worshipped her online. Within hours, the comments under her posts turned rabid. Her follower count plummeted. Brands blacklisted her. She was finished. Mason spiraled even faster. His name was on every financial watchdog report for fraud. His loans were called in, his credit cards declined. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls the moment the money was gone. And I'm the woman who smashed a plate into my face and laughed while I bled. She begged me to meet her at the house. I went. The once spotless, cold palace now looked like a war zone. Newspapers were piled at the door. Unopened bills were stacked high on the kitchen counter. Mom was sitting on the couch, her eyes hollow. "You did this," she whispered, her voice cracked and thin. I crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze directly for the first time in years. "No, Mom," I said softly, my voice clear and steady. "You all did this? I just gave the world the receipts." The final nail in their coffin came a week later. For decades, Dad had held his seat on the city council like a king on a throne. But when the council voted unanimously to strip him of his position, thanks to Ethan presenting a mountain of evidence we had collected, Dad walked out of that chamber a pale, shaking, and utterly broken man. I was standing on the steps outside. As he passed me, his eyes glassy with defeat. "You ruined us," he rasped. I gave him a small, quiet smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Dad. I just gave you exactly what you gave me all those years. They lost everything. The company, the money, the influence, the carefully constructed golden image. And Ethan, he now sat in the boardroom where my father once ruled, running Reynolds Development Group with a steady hand and a quiet dignity. The man my family humiliated now owned the empire they had built on cruelty. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their love. I had something far better. The justice they thought I would never have the power to take for myself.